this off. Welcome. I am Terry Vaughn III, Vice President of Research and the Director of the Pell Institute at the Council for Opportunity in Education. Thank you all for joining our webinar today titled Helping Low-Income Students Select Colleges with the Highest ROI, Return on Investment. Over the next 50 to 60 minutes, we will be learning about how advisors and counselors at both the high school and college level can use recent data about low-income students and college selection as a resource to help low-income students select the best colleges for their academic and professional success. This webinar is based on a recent report released by Georgetown's Center on Education in the Workforce titled The Colleges Where Low-Income Students Get the Highest ROI. On this note, I am happy to introduce one of the report's authors, Dr. Anthony Carnevale, who will be sharing some of the findings from this report. Anthony is a research professor at Georgetown University and the director of the university's Center on Education and Workforce. Among his many accomplishments, he has led the center since it was created in 2008. I am also very happy to introduce Dr. Sari Byerly, the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at Idaho State University. In addition to working at Idaho State University, Dr. Byerly is a longtime TRIO community member. She is also the immediate past board chair for the Council for Opportunity in Education and currently oversees Idaho State University's Access and Opportunity programs, among other responsibilities. So before we dive into the details of this report and the implications these findings have for practitioners, we will first explore how this report came to be and how some of its key terms are defined to better understand the data. Sari will start our discussion off today with some initial questions.
Fabulous. I'm super excited to be here. Anthony, to get things started, can you tell us what motivated your center to create this report and why this report is relevant for current discussions about college access and success?
Well, I can tell you in part what motivated me to do this work. And it has something to do with all of you. That is, Arnie Mitchum is an old friend of mine. We both knew each other when we were young. And I remember he found out that in order to get the money out of the Appropriations Committee, he had to get permission from the Budget Committee in the Senate. And so we came over to get to know me, and he was a very impressive man. So for me, all this connects back to Arnie. The reason this was done is because the world changed. That is, it became apparent after the 80-81 recession that people needed, or most people ultimately would need more than high school to get a good job. That was due to technology change, globalization, and a much longer story in the economy itself. Employers weren't just hiring degrees, they were hiring people who they hoped were more trainable and adaptable on the job. And that meant higher education as opposed to high school. So we now live in a world where that is true. The statistics have literally flipped. It used to be that 70% of the good jobs were available to people with high school degrees only or less. And now it's quite the opposite. It's almost 70% of what you'd call a good job, which for us is about 45 grand before the age of 40 at a minimum. That access to good jobs is now principally controlled by access to post-secondary education and training. Training being a very new, kind of the new kid on the block that we're going to see a lot more over the next few years. So in the end, this set up a situation in which parents, when the kid was born, somebody was going to tell them, you know, someday you don't just have to pay for the booties, someday you're going to have to pay for college. So maybe you should have rethought this before you did it. Everybody knew that eventually, and college costs became the primary political issue around higher education. And since there's nothing to be done about college cost, or at least no obvious way to do it, in the end, we've moved from looking at college cost as a legislative matter and an economic matter, and looking more and more at demanding that whatever college you get, whatever you pay for it, it brings a job and decent earnings. So we've shifted from goals in the American system from what was in the 70s and early 80s, two goals for higher ed. One was access, and the second one was choice, which meant that you could get a Pell Grant and go to Georgetown. You can't get a Pell Grant and go to Georgetown anymore. Can't get a Pell Grant and go almost anywhere anymore. It's not enough. So it became paramount for everybody to begin to understand, and there was broad agreement outside the higher education community, not within. The higher education community is opposed to transparency and accountability. Politicians aren't, parents aren't, students aren't. So that's what's happened. As a result of that, a lot of foundations started giving money away to get people through school, including going to college, which was sort of new in the 80s. And those foundations came to me and said, we're all assuming we can create upward mobility in America by getting people to college. Because upward mobility in America is, in the final analysis, about money. So we want to get them good jobs and good wages, and we need to start paying attention to this. And before we give all this money away to all these people that are going to help people through the system, we want to know that it's going to work. So we got grants basically to examine their assumption. And that's how the center was created and how we ended up doing this report. We do a lot of this. We have a website that is loaded, loaded with program level economic returns to college for 3,300 colleges. God only knows, thousands of college programs. Our website is built off of data that comes from the White House, Treasury, Department of Ed, and the Census Bureau. That data is all available. It grows in strength. I would advise you to use either the college scorecard, which is, I think, much too complicated for people to mess with. I would advise you to use our website, because we basically got the scorecard in more usable form on our website. If you want to tell a kid, if you're going to go to college, this is probably what it'll get you. And if you're going to take this particular program, major in this subject, major in this field of study, here's what all the people up till last year, 2 years ago, up till 2 years ago, here's what all the people that did that before you at that college in that program, here's how much money they made and whether or not they got a job. So that's really the genesis of all this work. It's really it has become the core question in education. So that's why this happened, and we keep doing it, and we're going to do more of it. Everybody else is doing it. The Congress is essentially agreed on this on both sides of the aisle, that we want to know, we want to have absolute transparency at the program level. Forget the institution, unless it's Harvard. But at the program level, we want to know what happens to people if they take this program. We care less and less about the institution. We care about the program. That's where the variation in returns come. It matters more what you take than where you go. So unless you go to Harvard. So that's the genesis of this work, which you're going to see a lot more of from us, from the government, from your states. The tragedy in all this is that we all know, those of us who fool with the data, and the Obama administration dropped almost $100 million on the states. So to create the state longitudinal data systems for exactly this purpose. The problem we have is, while all of us know who play with the data, nobody else does, because we have yet to find a way to transmit this information to students. We have no career counseling system in America. So the presumption that many people made that simply knowing the answer to the question would draw a lot of people into websites is just not true. I mean, the websites are out of sight, out of mind. Nobody knows how to use them. And we have no counsel. So that's why we do this and will continue to do this.
Thank you. I know as I delved into the report and into the website and the different publications in there, I found myself hours later kind of lost in trying to figure out what to do as a practitioner. Can you help the other practitioners that are here kind of help us know how did you define low-income students in your report? And how does your definition relate to or differ from other definitions of low-income students?
In the end, what we use, because the data is universal, it's available, all the way down to program level pretty soon, within the next year or so, actually, is we use Pell Grants. That's not a perfect measure of low income at all, but it's a pretty good one. If you're writing a piece of legislation, the income bands associated with Pell Grants and family size would be a pretty good indicator of low income. And it is one we have in higher education that's universally available. So you can get more sophisticated. We underestimate the number of low income and working poor students using Pell Grants, because Pell Grants only apply to people who went to college. So there are actually a much larger group of low income and working poor prospective students in America. And that cohort is going to grow. It's the only part of the higher education, the higher education student population is going to grow in two ways. One is it's going to get more and more disadvantaged, especially as you go south and west. And the other is that there are going to be more and more advantaged kids. That is, there are going to be major increases in the share of American parents where both parents have a BA, and the income that goes with that, which means they can afford college. So we're going to get a sharper and sharper distinction between haves and have-nots by both race and class in the United States as we look out toward the future.
Can you also talk to us about what you mean by return on investment? How is ROI calculated in this report, and why is it a strong measure of economic value of a college degree?
It is a pretty standard way to do it. That is, we look at the cost. You measure the cost by institution generally, and then after we measure the cost, we take a look at the data connects your college transcript to the wage record system that's been available in the United States since 1937. Had to have wage records if we were going to have Social Security to calculate your Social Security payment, wage records if we were going to have unemployment insurance to calculate your unemployment insurance check, right? So we've always known this about workers. We connected that data to transcript data from higher education. And that, in a sense, is the core asset in all these data systems. Now, there will be more coming. The College Transparency Act, which has the votes in both the House and the Senate, if they can move it separately, will add a lot more information about this. Problem is, how do we get the information to anybody who needs it?
So Anthony, we're going to dive a little deeper into some of your findings. Can you tell us how does low-income students' return on investment compare to students from other economic classes, given all the definitions you just laid out?
It's lower. If you're an African-American female and you get an engineering degree and you got it from the same place as the people working beside you down the hall, the white guys, you're going to make less money than they do. And that is also true for Latinos and African-American men, and for a surprising share of low-income whites. So social class and race has effects that have nothing to do with the education system. Those effects operate in the labor market. So those effects are, on the other hand, the tendency, the most effective bias buster in the American toolkit is education. That is, people who are minority or low income or female will make more than other people who are minority, low income or female if they have more education. That's really the game we're in. So it works. It does not close gaps as much as we'd like, although at the BA level, there's an instinct, a belief among a lot of people who are advocates for low-income people and minorities and women. There is the belief that education can be a powerful liberating force, and it is. I mean, in fact, but the difficulty with all of this is that this has become more and more true since 1983, after the 88-1 recession. It's pretty much the universal truth now. And the difficulty is that while education has sufficient power to create racial, economic, and gender justice, definitely has the power to do that, no doubt about it. It doesn't do that. In fact, since the 90s, when OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe, to which America is a signatory, they were the first to discover is that is in the 90s in the United States, education no longer became the great equalizer. It had the opposite effect. So more and more now, education pretty much guarantees that we move racial, economic, and gender injustice or privilege from one generation to the next. It's now become an intergenerational system. And the primary determinant of whether or not people make it, or make it in the sense that they make sufficient earnings and are employed sufficiently to participate fully in their time, in their communities.
Follow-up questions, but given the power of education with all its ups and downs, what types of institutions, but you really mentioned earlier, programs, offer low-income students the highest return on their investment, and which offers the lowest?
One of the things about this that is complicates the hell out of the story is that institutions matter less and less and programs matter more and more. Now, if you want to go to Harvard, you're pretty well guaranteed a good job. Unless you become a school teacher, you're not going to make any more than any other school teacher. The union will see to that. So in the end, for almost all college majors, one of the things that has happened is that the earnings returns have climbed, especially at the graduate level, especially for men. And one of the complicated things that has shifted since the 80s, there are two things that happened. One is the value of college education grew, it basically doubled over the value of a high school degree. The other thing is that what was much more significant, because that first fact is the one the college presidents like to tell the audience. The second fact is that the program mattered more and more and more, and the institution mattered less and less and less. So that the variation in program returns, employment and earnings returns, is much greater now than the variation in levels of education and earnings. So you can get a certificate, if you get the right one, and make more than the average BA and make more than a lot of people with a graduate degree. If you 30% of two-year degrees make more than the average BA, 40% of BAs make more than the average graduate degree. So it is now a much more complex system than it used to be. And the only way you know, because you're, well, if you're in the college scorecard, which virtually 70% of the programs are, if you're in the college scorecard program, you can find out, just got to go look. and you'll find out what the earnings returns are on the program at the school where you want to go, and you'll find out if there's a better one down the road. But don't look for anybody to talk to you about that. You got to do it on your own. So, I mean, in general, it comes out the way you think. That is, there are high-flying programs. Business is a good earner. STEM, as we all know, is a good earner, but it's tricky. If you go into the business programs and you look at the occupations they go into and what they earn, which we now know universally, what you find out is that hospitality is like being a school teacher. That is, if you graduate in business with a specialization in hospitality, chances are you're going to be female, and your earnings are not going to be anywhere near the average business major. Same with STEM. If you go into STEM and you take biology, another highly female concentrated major, you're not going to make anywhere not as much as other STEM majors that take computers and math and things of that sort.
So why do you think certain students, particularly low-income students, are more likely to go to programs that might not produce the highest ROI in terms of their college degree and ultimately their employment?
If you, we did for the Gates Foundation a simulation in which we pretended we switched everybody around and gave people different majors. It is not hard when you do that to equalize earnings. What's hard is doing that. And also what's hard is saying that you ought to do that, because if you say you ought to, because one of the problems, for instance, is that women are concentrated in teaching, counseling, as are minorities, and those don't pay. So when you say, well, ought to be more STEM, you're suddenly being critical of the choices of women and minorities. So there's a politically incorrect version of this story, which is you can't talk about that. In the end, when we did that for Gates, they didn't publish it. It caused too much trouble. So the point is, we do know which programs at which institutions will get you a job and make you money, and you need to have somebody tell you or go look yourself. That's how you know. And if you don't have that, because most people don't have access to that kind of information, although all 50 states now have it for public institutions, the national government has it for all institutions and all programs. If you don't have that, the first thing you do is ask somebody, talk to somebody who's in the program before you, because that's what you're trying to find out, is what happened to the other people like me. And most of it, and that's what the data is going to tell you, what happened to other people who made the choice I did. So a lot of the legislation here has that flavor. The original bill and all this was called Know Before You Go. The idea of using information to begin to govern this system.
That response.
Okay.
Pardon?
Sorry, Terry, go ahead.
No. So I was saying, we're going to connect this questions about data to a practitioner's life. And I think Sari, that's where you're going to start.
Yes. I mean, I know as someone who has an impact on some of the decision making that especially our pre-college youth and pre-college adults are making. Why do you think it's important for practitioners to use ROI when working with students, particularly low-income students, and other social categories such as race and gender?
I think to be an economist about it for a moment, when we talk about opportunity in America, we're really talking about money. Now, there's more to opportunity than money. If you want to be a preacher, you're not going to make much money, and you should get a college degree. If you want to be a school teacher or counselor, if those are things you want to do to serve the community, but you need to be told that when you do that, you're going to give up a lot. You're going to leave a lot of money on the table if you got a college degree. So in the end, it seems to me that in the United States, when we talk about upward mobility, we're really talking about money. I mean, I know there are other dimensions to it, but that's what we're talking about. So in the end, that's why this has become a major driver in college decision-making. And it's not, a lot of the college professors, a lot of my colleagues are really offended by this because they think college is about Shakespeare or classics or something. And of course it is. But at the same time, it is the principal determinant of your lifetime earnings now in the United States. So there is an economic dimension to this that cannot be ignored, especially if we're talking about upward mobility. So it is a struggle that continues, although I think the struggle is basically over. The higher ed community lost, and these data are coming anyway. The real issue is going to be over the next few years is, are we going to mandate that the data get to the student? And if we are, how are we going to make that happen? So, because it's expensive. And my own bias about this is an opportunity for you guys. You have brother and sister programs that are high school related, college related, graduate school related. You basically own the whole system, and you should start doing this with high school kids. That's the general consensus on this. You don't want to track high school kids. You don't want to have a system like we used to have back when we had vocational education, in which, you know, the more affluent white kids were in the college program, college curriculum. Everybody else was somewhere else, right? Boys were in shop, women took home ec. We blew that system up in 1983 with A Nation at Risk. Now everybody supposedly gets a decent education, academic education through high school, and we essentially leave the labor market dimension to education to post-secondary education now.
I think this is really important information for limited income communities to have, and from our practitioners, especially since many of us who are out in those communities, we're making commitments, not just to the student, not just to the participant, but to their whole family and to their whole community, that their return on the investment, that going to college, going to post-secondary education will pay off. So some of the key pathways for low-income students involves them attending programs and institutions that the data says may lead to poor economic outcomes for students. How should practitioners reconcile this data with mentoring and advising low-income students to explore multiple academic and career success pathways? And what are better ways to connect the data to the work?
I think the answer is career counseling in combination with other kinds of counseling, or the word now is navigation, not counseling, although I think that just confuses people. It reminds me of a boat, not a school. But anyway, that's the answer. I mean, there is an argument that I hear all the time from pretty responsible people who say we shouldn't tell them these things, because if we tell them these things, they won't become teachers and counselors, right? They won't join or preachers. They won't join the low paying serving occupations. I don't think that's right. I mean, I think, yeah, maybe you want to tell the kids about Santa Claus, although I have my doubts about that too, if you should tell them, and the tooth fairy and all that stuff. But by the time they're 18, they're ready for the real stuff. I mean, you can tell them, I think you have an obligation to tell them, because we're talking about their future. And they're going to be invested in it, at least in the system we have now, largely through loans. They're going to be invested in it. This is the first big investment for many of them in their lives. And it will saddle them with debt, which means that second investment in houses and cars will come later.
So how can practitioners within higher education institutions use this data to help student retention, whether regarding improving or developing new programs and services to support student success?
I think the answer is go get trained up in career counseling. And it isn't career counseling unless you're using this data. Just not. Because if you're talking about careers, you want to know what's going to happen to people over the next 3 or 4 years, or what happened to them over the last 10 years. Not some theoretical thing about whether you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. That is, you can know specifically what it's going to cost and how much the economic return will be. And it may well be that what you want to do doesn't pay, but do it anyway. And no one's trying to, and most politicians on this issue in both parties are resolved that they don't want this data used in conjunction. They want all degrees to be transparent with respect to career and earnings. Everybody agrees on that, with notable exception, people on the right who are worried about privacy for a set of reasons, and people on the left who are worried about the serving professions. But in general, there's wide agreement that we want transparency on all degrees, and that we want accountability for any training. And the current mark of accountability in training, the one that passed the House a couple of weeks ago and would pass the Senate if it would move separately, is that we want 20% value added from any training program, short-term training Pell grants, which are in the House bill, and that we want, and then the other standard, which is the current number in the negotiations between the administration and everybody on gainful employment regulations, and the number that's at least floating around there is it's got to pay at least $25K, or you get no federal money. So, you know, that cuts one of the things. The higher education community is arguing that any training program should pay at least the median wage for high school graduates. I think that standard is too high. I think it's unrealistic. We won't have many certified nursing assistants in America if we do that. And clearly they're valuable. Now, there's an issue with their wages, but I don't think the federal government's going to solve it in the higher ed bill.
So just a quick follow-up question from one of the audience members. What do you mean by 20% above?
So there's a debate in the higher ed community wants a very high standard. Training is on the move. We've got more action on training now than we've had since the Carter administration. It's coming. First of all, the infrastructure bill is going to create a ton of it. And governors are running around with money falling out of their pockets, which is always dangerous. But that's what they're doing because they were given complete control of this money, God help us. So there are going to be 14 million infrastructure jobs. There is no money in the bill for training. Now the departments, transportation and others, saying, well, we have ways of moving other money around so it can be used for training. And that's true. Because the training argument, in order to get the bill, they had to drop that. So in the end, you're going to see a lot of training. You're going to see a lot of local newspapers writing articles about how the BA is no longer valuable, the bachelor's degree. It's already started. Because we're going to see a ton of money for training. Infrastructure is going to create high wage jobs for high school graduates. It will discourage high school graduate males, especially, from going to college at all. 7 years out, the infrastructure money is gone, and we're going to have to retrain them. But we're going to see a ton of money on the street for training. And so for a while, it's going to be a very training-rich environment. Every editor in America loves that story when it comes to them, and that is college is, you're depending on sending your kid to college to make sure they're middle class. And guess what, dear reader, because the people who tend to read the newspapers are middle class, it ain't working anymore. You can't, BA won't do it. You'll scare the hell out of them. Those articles always get huge numbers of hits because you're scaring people. They're basically not true. So in the end, I think we're about to enter an environment where you're going to be bombarded, and accurately so in many, many cases. You're going to be bombarded with information saying, become a plumber, don't go to college, or become a electrician, probably be better, or a computer programmer, or go get a crane operator's license. And you'll make a lot more money than college graduate, and you will. So that will turn into a general, the way human beings work is if you're for one thing, you have to be opposed to the other thing. So that if you're for training, you have to be opposed to the BA. That literally is the way this dialogue always goes. It goes every recession this happens. So we're going to see a lot of that. I mean, it's not harmful to the extent that training will work. But there's a longer term issue here, especially for boys, because boys, if they get a choice between a job and college, they'll take the job. Women stay in school because they know how they do, I don't, but their behavior shows that they know that if they're going to get a decent job, they got to get more than a high school education. And they do. They're much more active in education after high school than boys are now.
Anthony, I got a couple more questions for you, then we can open it up to the attendees. You mentioned that one of the best things that practitioners can do is get some career counseling. This is great for the individual. What would it take for us to build that on a national scale?
We've been working, as have other people, for about 3 years on that. The first 6 months were easy. That is figuring out why we needed it and what it ought to look like, sort of. Although what it ought to look like is complicated. But we haven't come up with literally, and I think we're talking to most of the people who are supposed to know. Nobody's got an answer. That is the general answer that you get from the education reform community, which in theory I think is a good answer, which is you want to do occupational exposure in middle school, but no tracking. We got rid of that with A Nation at Risk. We ain't going back there. You want to do internships and what is broadly called work-based learning, includes internships. Nowadays, it will include apprenticeship and so on. You want to do work-based learning in high school and in college. You want to have work-based learning or internships or co-op or whatever you want to call it. You want to have that, but it needs to be attached to your field of study, to your program. We have damn near none of that. I mean, we have things, states, there's a lot of energy going into this, trying to get employers more involved and that sort of thing. But there's a limit on employer involvement in America, in my experience. And that is, it's kind of like love. Everybody wants it. There's never enough to go around. The employers are fickle. They're here today, gone tomorrow. So I think where that brings us back to in terms of education reform is a tougher job, which is how are you going to integrate more applied kinds of learning and career-specific kinds of learning into the academic curriculum in high school. And the answer is in any high school where everybody wants to go to Harvard, it ain't going to happen because you're better off with 4 more AP courses than 4 courses that integrate your math with a CTE function. So there's going to be a class and race-based tracking of this in higher education. There already is. The whole new onslaught of training will create even more tracking between 2-year and 4-year institutions by race and by class.
And what role do you think that TRIO programs and TRIO practitioners can have in sort of building this robust national career counseling system that you're sort of laying out?
Well, one of the things that comes up with this is, okay, how the hell would you actually do it? Because this is being asked on the Hill and in the administration. It has been for a while. There are meetings. It's one of those meetings where at the end of the meeting, everybody sort of walks out and there's no answer because it's complicated. We have career counseling at the Department of Labor, the WIOA system, labor market counseling. It's grossly underfunded. It's never been funded. But it's at least part of their mission. They know the educators don't know this is part of their mission, and they don't want it as part of their mission. So in the end, you got the WIOA system. Now, whenever you get WIOA, you've got HHS, transportation, and the other agencies because they have to have an earnings standard and a program standard consistent with WIOA, is the way the government works. Educators, incidentally, in the first go around on this on the Hill in the last 2 years, that's what they're using. They're using WIOA as the standard. So in the end, we don't really know how to do this. If you tell colleges to give career counseling, if I'm running a college, if I'm running Georgetown, which I'm not, thank God, for the sake of the students, first of all, but if I'm running Georgetown, I'm not going to sell anything. It's not on my shelf. I'm going to put a lot of kids in classics programs and religion and philosophy, and it's a bunch of Jesuits running around. So I think you can't trust higher education to do this job. They're only going to sell what they got. So how do you get career counseling done? In high school, it's relatively easy in theory, which is, and what most people end up saying in these meetings is we need to construct a course that every high school kid has to take, in which they do their own education and career planning. And we avail them of this data that we have now. Now, the problem with that is high school kids don't have a clue as to where they want to go, what they want to do, and they shouldn't be asked to make those decisions at that age. So you can do it in high school, but you're never going to get all the way there. So where does the other counseling come in? What is nice about TRIO and other institutions like you is, as Arnie used to say to me, we don't give a damn about the colleges. We're here for the students. So you're sort of an anti-institution institution. And that makes, for me, that makes you qualified. That you should be doing this. And the other reason I think is smart is because the money for this is not there. The money's huge. And if you throw in mental health counseling and other stuff that everybody agrees is necessary now, the money's just overwhelming. So in the end, it seems to me that you people can do this more efficiently than the institutions can, because if we target this on those most in need, it'll be a lot cheaper. It'll literally be 1/5 the price. So if we run this kind of system through programs like yours, and there are others, this is where to start, because you could do that. You could create a categorical program, right? And you could have I would embed it in programs like yours. And that includes training the staff, getting people to take this stuff in their psychology courses when they're going to college. So, in the end, it seems to me that's the cheapest way to go and will have the most effect. And to the extent it works there, it will spread upward anyway. So, and the other thing is, it strikes me that this may be an advantage. The world is set up so that low income, minority, and females in their own way aren't going to get the same break as an affluent white guy or an affluent Asian guy. It's just not built for that. So this could be a sneaky advantage, because everybody assumes, and the data says it's not true, by the way, that rich kids always know what they're doing and their parents always know what they're doing. It's not true at all. They're fumbling around like everybody else. But if we had a group of people who are trying to be upwardly mobile and we gave them this advantage, it might be an advantage over the other kids. I think in the end, it very well might be. So especially if you can get work-based learning involved, and all of which is very, everybody's trying to do this at the moment. Not everybody, but there are programs of excellence all over the country. Everybody's trying to figure out, we took vocational education out of K-12 education in 1983, or beginning in 1983. So we have a completely academic program in K-12 now, and that's how you go to college. It doesn't prepare you for any career I can think of. Although they keep saying college and career ready, that's a myth. We threw away career ready. So we've got to find a way to get some kind of applied preparation back into the K-12 system and into higher ed. Neither one really wants it. It's part of the problem. So it's got to be a hostile takeover. And I think people like you are set up for that.
Oh, so you're going to help us when we write the bill for a Congress?
Tell me how to write the bill and I will go sell it for you.
There we go. Cool. So we got some time left, and this is the opportunity. If anyone has any questions, you could put it in the Q&A box. I do see some questions in chat, but if you could put in the Q&A box, that would be great. Anthony, one of the questions is, do you recommend that TRIO programs reach out to those in various industries to prepare students for work-based learning?
Oh yeah, to the extent you can. I mean, but you got to remember that comes at a premium in the United States. We don't do that here. We're about to do more of it because employers will do it if they think they need to do it. Employers are very predictable. If they need something, they'll come and get it because they're trying to make money, they're trying to make a profit, they're trying to stay in business. If they can't find that electrician, they're going to go to the governor and say, get me that damned electrician and do it quick. Never mind this registered apprenticeship crap. I want a training program. And, you know, if 5 of them get killed in the first year, that's their problem. But anyway, that's where we are. I mean, yes, employer participation is very valuable now. If you take the 3 things that inhibit young people from achieving what economists would call economic independence by age 32, which is the average age now when people arrive there, male and female, used to be age 25. The 3 barriers are education. You need some education or training that you didn't need back in the 70s. The other barrier is work-based learning. Third barrier is career counseling. So, and the work-based learning thing will always be, I mean, we're not Switzerland, we're not Finland where they do all this stuff, although they do it by class, which would be a problem here, because here it would be class and race and gender. So, you know, I think, I mean, you know, I think the Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training was supposed to be, I don't know whether this had happened or not, was the former ambassador to Switzerland. She's going to sell apprenticeship all over the place. She's going to be a big success because we're about to fund apprenticeship at a very high level. 7 years from now, they'll all disappear. So, you know, I think yes, employer involvement is crucial to the extent that you've got leverage with employers, to the extent that they need people. They will do anything they need to do. That's the way to think of them. Now, also, they're parts of communities. So if you're dealing with Chase Bank or an insurance company, anybody with offices all over the place, they've got community relations people because they are members of the community. They're a community-based service. So they've always been good on this stuff. Now, not everybody's going to get a chance to do work-based learning in a bank, and you wouldn't want that, but you can at least get them at the city council level to help you out. I mean, Chase, by the way, is making huge investments in this sort of thing. None of it is in counseling.
Another question for you. This one's a little more focused on the methodology, I think, of the study of your report. Where can one find ROI data on specific programs of study versus institutions as a whole?
Well, probably, and I know this is tooting my own horn, but the government has collected the data. In some respects, a lot of people think, well, they've done their duty. Everybody agrees we want transparency for programs, and that is degrees, and economic transparency for degrees, and we want accountability for training. We don't want no more Trump universities. So in the end, there are a lot of people that feel they did their job, and now it's up to the rest of us. But there are no rest of us. In fact, we are the only people that offers the full program, the full set of programs and institutions on our website. So you can, if you go into the college scorecard, they're not going to do calculations for you like we did, and they won't. The reason they don't want to is immediately that will turn into rankings, right? I mean, that's what will happen. We rank, by the way, and they don't want to do that. Politically, that is, you know, ranking programs with the whole Congress sitting there, most of them representing programs that don't work. It probably ain't going to work for you. So there is an issue about whether the federal government has the nerve, because they're the only people going to do this, they have the nerve to mandate this. And the obvious place is in access to Title IV in the Higher Education Act. Just mandate that all students have to know. How the hell you then build out that system? Maybe the federal government notify, I don't know. I mean, it really is in the end about education and career planning for young people and middle-aged, dislocated workers, same issue.
In the meantime, visit your website.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say that it's just sort of lately, I think that any kind of mandate is at least 4 years away. The College Transparency Act, this stuff about training will all pass. But at some point, this has to be dealt with. I mean, I don't know. But in the meantime, it's up to others of us to do that. We have foundation money that pays us to do that. That's why we do it. Because the foundations have figured out, especially if they're associated with higher education, that the real issue out there is earnings returns and cost. But we're not going to tackle cost. The one hope on cost is there's a view that if we get a program level information system, which we have, that means the program matters more in the institutions, that will encourage competition by program in higher education. And we already know that that has an effect on legislators. So one legislator from New York years ago said to me, when I first figured out that this would have an impact, said, we've got 25 places, I think is what he said, where you can get a degree in English literature in our system in New York State. Why don't we just have 5? And those 5 will be for all the people who want to major in that, make that their field of study. The other people who want to take a course in English literature or need it to fulfill their humanities requirement to get a BA, for example, let them take it online. So this program level information system is, at least in theory, a cost reduction strategy, because you can reorganize public systems because they're systems. Keep in mind, you cannot reorganize private colleges, because if you're Georgetown, where I teach, we sell, the full cafeteria. If there's a program in environmental terrorism that somebody's got somewhere, we're going to get one and a couple of professors to teach it, because we got to have everything, including good food, summer vacations, time abroad. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, climbing walls, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Anyway, so controlling cost, people will always be willing to pay for Cadillacs, right? Or whatever it is now, Audis. There'll always be people that'll pay 80, 90 grand for the right t-shirt or the bumper sticker. But the rest of the system really does depend on field of study and earnings returns and what you want to do, the first thing.
One last question for you, and sort of connects to what you just said. One of the attendees asked, so there's a shortage in STEM teachers, right? Is the government aware of this trend? And what is the plan to address this? And how does this sort of relate to, I'll add on, how does this relate to the data you're pointing out?
We're going to have, there is a view of American labor markets that is emerging literally in the last few months. Paul Krugman had an article, I think in the Times, must have been the Times, that's where he writes, saying this. And that is that this COVID, the great quitting or the great resignation is real. That what we're really dealing with here, and there's a case to be made for this, is that the American workforce is getting smaller, the growth is slowing down to 0 and maybe even negative after 2005. So that for the first time in American history since the late 60s, when we were fighting the Vietnam War and Johnson was doing the war on poverty at the same time, we're going to have real labor shortages in America. That is, there may actually be, and this is where you get the big fight ideologically, there may be a shift in power in America towards workers coming because they're scarce. At some point when only a small percentage of your population stops at high school or drops out, there won't be enough of them to make enough pool cleaners. And you're going to have to give your pool cleaner a raise in order to get him to take the job. So there is a theory emerging. We'll see if it's true. I would hope it's true, but there are a lot of people that argue against it, that we're beginning to see real occupational shortages. It ain't just going to be spot shortages. It's going to be general shortages across the board. Teachers is one of the primary areas. One of the things that I hear in these meetings, which I think is essentially true, is that we should have got free community college. So we'd have 6 years of high school. And one of the reasons everybody wanted to do that is there aren't going to be enough science teachers. And plus, if you're going to make people college and career ready, you better have 2 more years of high school, because otherwise it ain't happening. And you better have preschool, by the way. So what Biden was trying to do is to add 4 years into the system. I'm glad I'm not being born today. But that's what's going to happen. It's going to get longer and longer and longer. And they only make it by the time they're 32. And they used to make it, kids that made it by the time they're 25. So it's a longer journey. You need more help.
Well, Dr. Anthony Carnevale, we really appreciate you sharing your wonderful knowledge in this report. I also want to say thank you, Dr. Sari Byerly, for your awesome presence. We love you too. So thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope our discussion today has helped you consider ways to improve low-income students' college access and success. And please, 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 please feel free to contact us anytime to continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.